such an honor to have you join us this evening for Evergreen State College Tacoma virtual lecture series. This is our spring 2021 virtual lecture series. And tonight we're going to hear from our own leader and hero, Larry Gossett. Before we do that, we'd like to make sure that you know that we are very interested in all of the people knowing about Evergreen State College, that we are available, that we are recruiting, and that we are interested in all adult learners who are interested in getting their BA degrees. If you don't have your BA degree, please know that we would very much love to have you at Evergreen State College. If you do have your BA degrees, it might be time for you to consider getting your AA degrees. And so we'll be happy to have you join us when you are ready and how you are ready. I also want to just give honor to the fact that we are on native soil. And in being on native soil, we are on the land of the Puyallup Indians. We just want to acknowledge that it is their ancestors whose ground we stand on. We are still excited and fighting for the recognition of the Duwamish people. And we also hail in Olympia on the lands of the great people of the Salish Sea, as well as the our own Squaxin people. And so and the Nisqually, we just want to honor them and say that we are on that land. And now that we know we are on that land, we have a responsibility to do better and to be better by them. At this time, I would like to introduce to you our virtual lecture series. I'd like to share with you a little bit about Larry Gossett. Larry Gossett, who is a Seattle person, one of our champions of Seattle, the Pacific Northwest. And he also is a graduate of the University of Washington. Larry was a student leader very early, beginning in his high school years, and also spent a lot of time in activism at the University of Washington, establishing, shutting down offices and making sure that today we had a Black Studies department, that we had an educational opportunity program for students to enter in large numbers. And before he started this movement, it did not exist. Black people were coming into college in very small numbers. So this movement gave way to the state of Washington. Today, we know not just Black studies, but there are also Chicano studies, or we know about Asian studies, Pacific Islander studies, are all based on the work that Larry did back in the day. We also want to honor Larry's work for establishing Black student unions, making sure that students were organized, and then his work with the Four Amigos, his work that recognized the importance of coming together between different ethnicities and different cultures and supporting each other's movements. This work is spanning more than 6 decades. I'm not going to give away his age, but I do want you to know that Larry has spent the last 20 years or more as a public servant, first for Central Area Motivation Program, where he headed up a formerly Model Cities movement that was established to strengthen the inner cities, or today the urban areas of our cities. And then he moved into being an elected official of King County in the Pacific Northwest. He was a King County councilman for more than 20 years. I could go on and on, but I would rather just introduce this man to you as a hero, someone who has laid a groundwork for all of us in education, in our communities, in growing our communities. I give you Larry Gossett.
Thank you very much, Marcia Tate Arunga. It's a pleasure always to be with you and the other leaders of the movement at Evergreen State that has brought us the breadth of educational quality that the students, some of whom are, I would expect, are listening tonight. But if it weren't for you and the others whose names I'll mention a little later, you guys wouldn't have the quality that you have. And everybody who can should try to get some exposure, either by uh, coming into these lectures or by registering as new students. But I wanted to start with Sweet Honey in the Rock, just as you did, because while we were listening to that beautiful African-American cultural group saying, I thought about a couple of days ago, the head of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, I believe it was, says something like this, and it also follows up with your recognition of the land upon which we exist now. He actually said, Marcia, that, oh, we should be so happy we're Americans. Oh, this is a great country. Yeah, I know some of you think that the Indians were here, the native peoples were here before us, but they might have been here, but they had no culture. He had the audacity to say something like that. There were about 18 million native peoples residing on this continent when Columbus uh, uh, ended up in what is now Santo Domingo and thought he was in India with his stupid self and called the people Indians. And then they went about the business of committing genocide in the West Indies and then throughout North America. So it's absurd that the beautiful cultures that had been existed for thousands of years. Most tribes in North America had the position that this land is our land. They didn't have no concept of private ownership because the private ownership that some individuals should own the land and then use it for their own enrichment and profit was absurd to the native people. It was irrational and not very humane. So it was insulting when he said that. Marcia, you had asked me to talk about my early days in the movement and how my consciousness, uh, um, grew. And I'd like to start with my time in VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, which essentially is the domestic Peace Corps in our country. And I entered VISTA in March of 1966. And the reason that I joined, yeah, this is a picture of me in VISTA. The reason that I joined VISTA is because I did not want to go fight in the Vietnam War. And no Vietnamese ever called me any names that I thought was ugly enough that I was going to sign up to fight against my Vietnamese brothers and sisters. But I didn't want to run to Canada or go to jail. And I found out that joining VISTA or the International Peace Corps were the only ways you can get a deferment from the war. So I want to be honest, I didn't join VISTA to help the poor in New York City or Seattle or anywhere else. It was a way to get out of fighting in an unjust war. However, as a result, I can truthfully say to your students and whoever else is participating and listening this evening that joining VISTA was the signature experience in my life. Here's why. I worked on the Lower East Side. This picture reflects me being a VISTA and on the Lower East Side, but I was also a VISTA for the longest period up in Harlem. This is a picture from Harlem. And that year, 66, 67, there was profound changes going on in our country. Marsha, I know that you, Dr. Mims, and others know that it was 1966 when Stokely Carmichael articulated a new phrase that went through the African American communities of the US very rapidly, but it didn't go through any community as quickly and as deeply as it did Harlem and some other objectively very poor communities in New York City. So I arrived in New York 2 days after Stokely Carmichael had picked up the march that had led to the shooting of a famous civil rights leader who had integrated the University of Mississippi. And on that march, he articulated, he said, what we got to do is take it beyond civil rights. We got to start fighting for power, brothers and sisters. And he was the one that gets the credit for articulating the phrase Black Power. I came to New York City just 2 or 3 weeks after Stokely Carmichael articulated that phrase. And already, just in 2 weeks, everybody, and I got there 15 months after Brother Malcolm X had been murdered in Harlem. He got murdered in February of 1965. But those two big events caused the Black Power movement and defining what it would be like and why it was so important to tie into it and start talking about how it could be liberated as a new philosophy in New York City and Harlem and Bed-Stuy and other communities was very important. They pointed out to me I worked for Harlem Youth Incorporated, which was a youth program in Harlem. And I was, like you said, Marsha, I was born in Seattle and I lived in Seattle's Black community, which was the central area. Martin Luther King came to Seattle in 1961 and he spoke to the students at Garfield. I was a sophomore at Garfield then. I ended up graduating from Franklin, but I was a sophomore at Garfield when he spoke. And he said that the central area of Seattle is now the fifth most segregated community city in all of the land. Only 4 cities, I can't remember which they were more racially segregated than were Seattle. And we never had discussions like that or heard about anything like that as students or as Black people in a larger community or whites in a larger community until Stokely came to Seattle November 8th, 9th, and 10th, 1961. He said that 88% of all Blacks in Seattle lived in the central area, and people ought to be able to live wherever they want. And I use the example for my fellow students. I knew that my daddy wanted to live in 1956, Marshall. He had enough money to move out of High Point because he got a job as a mailman. And he was getting paid better than he got paid when he was a janitor and other blue-collar jobs that he had. So he got assigned to the West Seattle post office. He said, I want a house in West Seattle. And the realtor told him, that's not a realistic option for a Negro. So we have to show you houses in the central area. And then he went to a second realtor and he didn't say anything. The realtor just said, get in the house, Mr. Gossett. Get in my car, Mr. Gossett. And he drove him to the central area and showed him housing. So Daddy just gave up. I guess the realtor's not going to show me any houses in West Seattle where it would be most convenient. Not that he wanted to be around white, but it was more convenient for our family. He had 6 kids to live, to continue to live in Seattle because he was assigned to the West Seattle post office. So that kind of racism was really kind of bad in Seattle, but it didn't compare with Harlem. Harlem, I stayed on I did my work on 117th Street between Lenox and 7th Avenue. And the first thing we did was do a survey of how many people lived on that one block from corner to corner. And I thought, I did the survey with 3 other vistas, 4 of us. Took us about 2.5 weeks. And we estimated about 9,000 people lived on one block. And at Harlem Youth Incorporated, we were supposed to work with youth 12 and under. providing them with educational enrichment, whatever that meant, and cultural exposure or whatever. They said we were supposed to take them down to Central Park. That was only 7 blocks from where they here live. And about 50 or 60% of these kids, 12 and under, had never seen Central Park. But the point I'm making, 9,000 people living on 1 block. Over half of them were living at or below the poverty level. 96% of them were Black. A few Puerto Ricans lived on 117 then. And I found that in Harlem, someone pointed out to me, Marsha, that Harlem by itself was about the same population as Seattle. And in 1967, there was about 600,000 people that lived in Seattle, Washington. And when I got to Harlem in 1966 and working there, I found that there was 565,000 people that lived, listen to the area. It was 110th to 155th, 45 blocks long, and only 7 blocks wide. It had more Africans living in that little space in New York City than any, there wasn't that many African people in any equivalent space area in the whole wide world. That includes all of Africa. We didn't have that many people forced to live together, mostly in poverty with little or no control over their lives. And that's why Black Power went through that community so quickly. The only other thing I want to say about Harlem is that I knew from coming from Seattle that we had 12 public high schools and 3 Catholic high schools. And in Harlem, I found there was only one Franklin High School, only one high school. And then I read an article in the New York Times and the Amsterdam News that said that 70% of the Black youngsters in Harlem drop out of school in the 9th grade. Well, there's some logic to that. There wasn't any high schools for them to go to in Harlem at that time. And then most of the stores on 125th Street and businesses, including the Apollo Theater, were primarily owned by white people. Some were owned by Blacks, but very few. It was very difficult for Black businesses to own any property anywhere in Harlem. So Black Power caught up on very, very quickly. So suffice it to say, because I got to move on, when I got out of Harlem and returned to Seattle, the people did not know me. Let me give you an example. SeaTac Airport, Mama and Patrick's my youngest brother. He's passed away, but he was 12 years old then. They came out to pick me up. My plane landed from New York airport about not 10 minutes before they got there. So what I noticed, both of them walked right up to the gate. It was at the right gate, but both of them walked past me. And until I said, Mama, because our voices don't sing. And then Mama said, oh, that's my boy. Let me turn around. So Mama came back and said, boy, what's wrong with you? I said, nothing wrong with me, Mom. What she saw though, Marsha, was a big natural. This is the radical changes I went through. She saw shades. I never wore shades in Seattle, and they were prescription because I couldn't see if I didn't have a prescription. She saw a dashiki, like you see these brothers on 125th Street behind me in the picture there. I have it on. And I had some beads on. And she called me Larry about 3 times. This is what was the killer for Mama. I said, Mother, I shouldn't have been moving this fast, but I was excited to have people know I was Black. I said, Mama, my name is not Larry. She, oh boy, you done gone crazy now. What's your name? I said, Abba Yoruba. She said, Uba, what? Oh boy, come on here. You're talking all that nonsense to me. I'm taking you home to Daddy. He gonna cut that hair. I said, no, Mom, I'm sorry, Dad. It's not gonna. I wasn't disrespectful. I said, Dad's not gonna be cutting my hair. But I changed radically. So when I got back to Seattle, I said, what kind of Black Power activities are going on here? And people said Stokely Carmichael had come and spoken at Garfield on April of 67. I got back home in September of 67, and they told me that a lot of Black youth and some of my homies had organized after Stokely spoke the first chapter of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Seattle. And that, Marsha, I went to the meeting, and Kathy Halley And, I grew up with Kathy Halley's little brother, and Omari Tahir Garrett and I all was on the same Little League team at Garfield when I was 12. So I knew her because she was, his little sister back in the day. But they had a Black Power organization. It was called SNCC. I was still a student at the University of Washington, so I joined that. And after I joined SNCC, I'm glad Trey put this picture up, because after we joined SNCC, we found out that there was a Black Youth Conference in Los Angeles, Thanksgiving weekend, 1967, and 32 of us rented a bus. We had Black churches, SNCC. We got along well with radical whites in Seattle, the communists and the Socialist Party. They all gave money to help us rent a bus. And some of the Black members of their organization went with us because it was just a conference for Black youth. We went to Los Angeles Thanksgiving weekend. And there's three things that relate to what we decided to do in Seattle that happened at that conference. We had never heard, Marsha, that Black students were organizing in high schools and colleges, and they were calling their organizations the Black Student Union. At that conference was Jimmy Garrett. I never forget him, James Garrett, the president of the BSU at San Francisco State. And he had been organizing, I think, a whole year, since 66 at least. The Black Student Unions, a Black Power organization at San Francisco State. There were BSUs at UCLA, USC, California State universities, and various high schools all throughout Watts and all over LA. And they were all at this Black conference. Also at this Black conference were Black athletes, which impressed me. Tommy Smith and John Carlos of the 1968 fame, from going to the Olympics. They were there. Lou Alcindor, we call him Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was the center for UCLA, and they were #1 in the nation Thanksgiving weekend, 1967. These brothers were bad. And Lucius Allen and Mike Warren, all three of the Black starters on UCLA's basketball team, were at this Black conference. They wanted to figure out and have the opportunity to discuss how can they participate in this Black movement. I really liked that we had Black athletes there. And at that conference, a decision was made to boycott the 1968 Olympics. That's where it happened. LA, Thanksgiving weekend, 1967. A national movement grew out of that to boycott the Olympics. And thank Lord for him, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Mike and Lucius, they didn't play. They were three of the best college ball players, and they didn't allow pros to play in the Olympics back in those days. They were three of the best in the nation. They didn't go. Some of the brothers from San Jose State, they decided to go to Olympics and run track, but they said, we're gonna do something that manifests and symbolizes the Black Power movement. So two of them came in first and third in the 100-yard dash, or 220, I can't remember which were, and they did the famous Black Power salute, and everybody loved that. But all that happened at the conference. So the ideal of organizing a Black Student Union at the University of Washington was developed as a result of us attending that conference. And on the bus back, Marsha and other attendees at this, this session, this discussion we're having, we were so anxious to start BSUs is that we had 7 people from Portland on the bus, and the other 23 of us was from Seattle. And we organized the Oregon-Washington Alliance of Black Student Union on a bus taking us back to the Northwest. And then when we got to Seattle, I was put in charge of organizing the Seattle Alliance of Black Student Unions. But the first BSU was at the UW. And we announced that we exist. But Marsha, we didn't go downstairs in the hub and fill out no paperwork to be recognized as a student group. Come on, man. How are white people gonna tell us we have the legitimate right to exist? So we had a rally in front of the hub, January 6, 1968. All this has been documented, so people want to read, they can. we had a rally and we said, we exist. Somebody did ask us, are we going to go down? And we don't have to register. We exist, y'all. We're not going to register. And this institution is an institutionally racist environment, and we're going to change it by any means. You know, we have to quote Malcolm X, by any means necessary. And I could tell a lot of the white students kept walking, and some of them listened to it, but they didn't say nothing. And it was only 13 of us marching, so 13 founders of the University of Washington BSU. At that time, to show you how manifestly racist the University of Washington was, they had 63 Black students on the campus. Only 2 Black, oh, by the way, out of 35,000, I got to put stuff in perspective. There was only 2 Black professors on the University of Washington campus, not 1 Black, Latino, or Asian, or Latino, or Native counselor on the campus, not one. And E.J. Brisker, our main leader, did some research, and he found that in the Arts and Humanities department, about 300 classes, there was, and then that picture is me when I became the president in 68, 69. 300 some classes in that department, and EJ said there's not one person of color, not Black, no Latino, Asian, a Native American, or Indian that teaches any class. Then EJ and Eddie Dimmons, these cats were good researchers. They looked at the class curricula, or some, whatever that thing is that has the books and the magazine you're supposed to read. Somehow they looked at that for, they looked at that for 300 classes, and they said, brothers and sisters, there's not one book written by a Black, a Latino, Asian, or Native American that is being used in any of these arts and humanities classes. And they went further. There's not even a magazine to read an article written by a Black, or the topic matter wasn't even about Blacks, Latino, Asian, Native American people. The reason I'm being expansive is that, and I'm kind of proud of this too, the Black Student Union at the University of Washington was always expansive. We felt that we were lead activists in the entire third world, not only in America, but throughout the world. So since there was only about 4 Indians and 8 Latinos on the whole campus, 2 Native American sisters were in the BSU, and Jesus, one Latino brother, joined the BSU. I don't know if other Black student organizations ever had other non-whites, but we did from day one, had these third world brothers and sisters, because they didn't have no organizations to call their own. And it wasn't very many Latino and Native American people on the campus. Finally, we also had some class consciousness. A lot of us, I'd start reading radical literature when I used to go to the Machu bookstore on 125th Street when I was working in Harlem. And they said, yeah, Black history is important, brother. And all these Black, but if you're gonna go back to Seattle or wherever you come from and be active, you got to read other stuff too. So they told me that they're the ones that told me that Ho Chi Minh used to come to that bookstore. I didn't even know Ho Chi Minh had ever been to New York, anywhere in the US. But he was a young student. Somehow he was in America before he went back to make the revolution. And he said, you got to read about other philosophies that talk about mobilizing people for radical or revolutionary change. So it was at the Machu bookstore that they started telling me about Ho Chi Minh, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Karl Marx, Frederick Engels. It was at that bookstore that I read the Communist Manifesto, and I was scared to read it because everything I'd ever read, brothers and sisters, comrades that are listening, had said that communism and socialism, that's evil. But that's all I ever knew. I read that, made some sense to me when Karl Marx said that the people that do the work and create the wealth and the spoils should be the ones that control what happens to the spoils of their own labor. I said, oh, shoot, I ain't gonna cuss. we supposed to be deciding where all this wealth. I'm a descendant of slaves, Marsha. 246 years we worked for nothing, for some capitalists and racists to get wealthy, and they justified saying we're by nature lazy and inhuman and incapable of learning how to read and write. So those philosophies that I learned in Vista all had an impact on me. I came back to Seattle and we implemented a lot of them at the U. I just want to mention the demands that we came up with at the Black Student, and then I need to move on to two other things I want to mention before I open it up for questions. Uh, we did our research. So we said we want to recruit more Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American and poor white students. I mean, a lot of us had radical ideas, so we thought the poor whites should be served by the University of Washington too. That's why if anybody was to go and look at the Office of Minority Affairs when it was set up under Dr. Kelly in 1970, it had a Black division, Asian and Pacific Islander division, Latino division, and Native and disadvantaged white division, because we had we felt that we should recruit a few more white students that don't ordinarily get a chance to go to a big state university like the University of Washington. And we were willing to do anything necessary on the campus to bring about change. Let me give you one example. We'd go into Marsha, we would go into a U.S. history class, colonial history class, and they'd be studying about the colonial period and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and these other people. They never mentioned Crispus Attucks, and of course, to most of the listeners of this, they weren't going to listen mention him. He was the first Black the first person to die in the fight against the British back in 1770. Not 1776, 1770 he died. But when they talked about colonial history, we said, well, how come in this class, first of all, we introduced ourselves to the class, might be 400 students in there. We're here because we'd like for you all to support the establishment of Black Studies program. If we had a Black Studies program, you all would be hearing the truth about colonial history in this class. And Eddie Demings was a marvelous speaker. Oh, this brother could speak. So he would turn on, he would say something like, yes, you're probably learning that Brother George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were your founding fathers. But check this out. If you knew the truth about the colonial period and who had the power amongst the colonialists, they were the very wealthy and the best off economically, and they were rich and they were slave owners. When George Washington died, Eddie would say he had 101 slaves. When Thomas Jefferson died in 1824, he had 98 slaves on their plantation. So guess what, y'all? These guys might be y'all's forefathers, but they were much more likely to be our daddy. They thought we was crazy, but we were just trying to make a point to them. And we'd go into language arts classes, English, they called it English 101 or something. And they thought we was crazy, the students in there. Because what we would do, Marsha, we would look all through the class, they had them shelves, look at book. They didn't know what we were looking for. We didn't say nothing. And then we would say something. How come there's not one book on African-American literature on the shelves, on the student's desk, or on your desk, professor? What's up with this? This is why we need Black Studies. We need to integrate and speak the truth to students in English. Learn the truth, y'all. And then we would leave. But the administration called that disruptive, and they sent us warning letters saying, if you disrupt classes, you might be subject to getting kicked out of the university. But we would call Malcolm, we want change out here by any means necessary. you know, we didn't care nothing because some of us already been in jail. We had to sit in at Franklin High School, March 29th, 1968. The BSU, the black students out there called us at the BSU office at the UW because we'd already, or after January 6th, we organized BSUs at Garfield, Franklin, Roosevelt, Roosevelt, Chief Sealth in Cleveland, and we organized them at Seattle Community College, and we organized at Washington, Meany, Bourne, and Sharpless junior high schools, because we felt that the junior high school kids need to be involved in this Black Power movement, because they were really able, willing, and able to get involved in action to create power for Black people in Seattle. So we had about 20 some BSUs organized by the end of March. We had about 35 organized by the end of May when we had to sit in at Franklin. It was historic, and they said Seattle had never had anything like this. But the prosecuting attorney, Charles Carroll, was on TV on the evening of April 2nd, talking about we still, although at the Franklin sit-in, they gave in, they kicked 2 Black girls out for wearing their hair natural, 2 brothers for having fights with white kids. The white kids went back to class, the Black kids got suspended or expelled. And there was a long history of this disparate treatment of Black and white students at Franklin that had been gone on. And of course, there was no Black history class at Franklin. So having a Black history class, hiring the first Black principal in the history of Seattle Public Schools were all demands of the Black students at Franklin. And the powers that be didn't never seen nothing like this. So they said, yeah, to all demand. We was happy. But somebody decided that somebody got to go to jail for this. So they, on April 4th, they arrested Aaron Dixon, Larry Gossett, and Carl Miller, 3 University of Washington students who came up there, and they said, we upset their Negroes. Their Negroes? How come we can't just be people to think for ourselves? And at least that's what Charles O'Carroll said on TV. He said, no way we're going to allow outside agitators come into Seattle and upset our Negroes. This nonsense that prejudice exists in Seattle. Come on, y'all. That's me saying y'all. I don't know what he said. But that led to us being arrested on the morning of the 4th. That same day, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. We were in jail. The Black brothers in the King County Jail, you know, they wanted to beat up the white prisoners. And I'm glad me and Carl and Aaron was in there, because we said, and they respected us because we were in the Black Power movement. We said, brother, why did Martin die? Why did they kill Martin? He was building a poor people's campaign. And he was talking to the Black poor, the primary ones. And he was talking to Latino, Asian, and Native. And he was trying to talk to poor whites, trying to get them to come and march on Washington in June. And all the groups together put pressure on the Congress to create changes that benefited poor people, higher wages, higher welfare benefits for people unable to work, jobs at livable wages. Martin had all this stuff in his agenda. He wasn't against no white. He wanted to organize everybody, not no poor whites that are off in this King County jail. And then they listened to us. By 8 o'clock the next morning, we had 4 changes, and all the inmates had some input that we wanted in the King County jail. And naturally, we found out the next day, this is really interesting, and it's true. The guards went to their union and said, no matter what, don't ever let those Negroes come back to the jail. They didn't want us in their jail anymore. What's wrong with it being unifying the prisoners rather than having a fight? They didn't like that. So that happened. I want to say on May 20th, a day after Malcolm X's birthday, we had to sit in at the UW, and we got the university commit to recruiting more Black, Latino, Asian, Native American, poor white students, establishing a Black studies program, the establishment of an ethnic cultural center and theater, because we thought that cultural, remember what we talked about earlier, Marshall, the Black and other minority students, we need to be able to organize our own cultural events, and we need a space. So the Ethnic Cultural Center and the Ethnic Cultural Theater, both on 40th and Brooklyn Northeast, those were in our demands. And then we said the Black Student Union should have representatives on every decision-making body on the University of Washington campus. Those are our demands. Dr. Odegaard signed off on all of them. So we started implementing them. One thing I want to say is, you remember I said there was 63 Blacks on the campus, 68. By 1975, friends, the University of Washington had 1,666 Black students. There's an article in this week's Column magazine that said 3 months later, remember the university had never had over 2 Black professors. 3 months later, in September or November of '68, the university already hired 12 new Black faculty. One was Joe Brazil to work in the we was kind of crazy. They start, and we said, y'all, no, we got to start working on this summer. These 3 cats and all the other, it was on the sit-in, 124 people sat in, and the president never thought about the fact that there ain't never been 124 students on the University of Washington campus. When we had that sit-in, we went to the Black Panther Party. They had about 25 Black Panthers came out there and joined us. Let me see, Aaron was the leader. Carl, EJ, me, everybody had joined the Black Panther Party that were leaders of the Black Student Union at one level or another. EJ, they actually ran for state legislator in the fall of '68 as a Panther candidate, Black Panther Party. So it was an interrelationship between the Panthers and the Black Student Union that I think served the Black activist community very well. But we had 125 set in, 25 Panthers, about 30 or 40 Black Student Union from the high schools. And this is what I like to tell people, about 24 lumpen proletariat. Who in our audience can tell me what a lumpen proletariat is? Okay, I'll tell y'all. Street brothers and sisters. Lumpen proletariat is a big term that Marx coined when he was writing doing his writing about the need for socialism. And I think that the reason they wanted to come out to the U, they liked that kind of talk that we talk, like where I'm talking now. They said, we do need Black power, but they weren't in school. Most of them hadn't graduated from high school, but they said some action, and y'all serious? We're gonna be there. And these 3 brothers coming out of the sit-in at the University of Washington, none of them were ever students. They were some of the street brothers that came with us for the sit-in. But you do what's necessary to build enough. And because we believe in educating white students, we had the soul search meetings every Friday afternoon in the hub, and about 100 or 200 whites came. And we were, by the time we had our sit-in and get them, we said, we don't want you in there with us. But they marched around the administration building. I don't know if any of you have ever seen pictures. While we were in there, it was a significant political strategy. The white students were marching around saying, we support the Black Student Union. And I heard years later that caused hesitation in the police, in the popo, from rushing us. And that was the reason that we wanted that to happen. We were served well. And then when we left the university president's office on the evening of May 15th, I even heard criticism of our chant, beep, beep, bang, bang, Ungawa, Black Power. They said we were speaking African stuff. What? When we came out, some white students told the press that. It was funny. But I went on from 1970 to 73 to work in the Office of Minority Affairs and recruiting Black students. I supervised the Black Student Division. And we did a lot. Like, that's why I said by 75, we had 1,600 students. The main point I want to make, none of these changes would have occurred if we didn't have what's her name? She's an anthropologist. Uh, she said that the only time significant change is made anywhere in the world is you got to have a core disciplined group of people with a vision that's willing to fight for the change and be, humane and compassionate and the way they carry themselves and be genuine down for the people, and you can bring about the change. And that's what we had, 13
Yes.
students out of 35,000 to bring about the change. Then I worked at the U. Then in 1974, I went back to the community and got hired by Eddie Wright Jr., who was the executive director of CAMP, to work for CAMP. And then by 1978, I became the executive director of CAMP and worked in the anti-poverty movements of the central area until 1993. And by that time, because of my activism in the community, I got in the 80s, I got involved in the Rainbow Coalition to help Jesse Jackson run for president. I do not think that Obama would have won the presidency if Shirley Chisholm hadn't run for president in 72 and brother Jesse Lewis Jackson hadn't run in 84 and 88. They laid the foundation. We as Black people got to continue to lay the foundation for the kind of change we want to see in the future. We got to be the change makers. So I know that my time is running out, and I want to leave time, Marsha, for questions. And I want Trey to show, yeah.
Oh my goodness, Larry, thank you so much. How rich that is. And thank you so much for sharing what you were had to give us. What wealth, what indeed, that is true wealth. And I say this because you have described, first of all, being in jail at the time that on the day that Martin Luther King was. I didn't realize that two of our panelists in our lecture series, you and Elmer, were involved in being arrested during that time.
Yeah. And me and Elmer were in a car caravan to Oakland in April of 68. We went to California again for just a Black Student Union conference. And the keynote speaker was the chairman of the Black Panther Party, Bobby Seale. And all I can tell y'all is that the 20 Black youth from Seattle just fell in love with the Black Panther Party as a result of us being invited to the funeral of Lil Bobby Hutton. And we went across the bridge from the BSU conference at San Francisco State to his funeral, and we saw hundreds of disciplined Black youth all standing in attention, and it just had a really positive impact on us. Bobby saw that and right away agreed to come to Seattle to organize the first chapter of the Black Panther Party outside of the state of California that was ever organized. It was organized in Seattle, Washington. And he came on April 18th, 1968. And then we had a party ever since from that day forward. And he appointed Aaron Dixon, one of our best movement brothers in the BSU, to be the leader. But Aaron, I forgot to mention, Elmer actually went to jail with us from the Franklin sit-in because they arrested him. They arrested 3 brothers at Franklin. They arrested all Black males, but we had a lot of sisters involved too.
Beautiful. Glad to hear that there were a lot of sisters involved.
Yeah.
You didn't leave them behind. So what a lovely story.
I don't know what they're going to say to you when they talk about
it. They may have a different opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any questions that my
What time is it? I don't even know.
It's you have 7 minutes still. And I think there's
I just want to, anybody have any questions?
Yes. Okay, Dr. Hardiman, go right ahead.
All right.
Hi, Joy.
Hey, how are you? Whoa,
so
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, so much history. Oh, just amazing.
All of this will be in my book too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I will buy. Put me down for an advance copy.
Okay. Yeah,
Right.
just encourage me to get it done, you and
Oh,
Marcia.
I will. I will. I will send you money for Cash App for my
Yeah.
copy in advance.
All right. Go ahead. What's your
So
question?
here's my question. When I listen to you and to Elmer and Teresa and to myself, etc., I think about how our activism was formed, was really formed by our university, our kind of college kind of life, you know. I mean, I had a parallel one, but it was different. It was more, I was on the East Coast, so
Yeah.
so I was more SDS and all that kind of stuff out there. But
Yeah.
so I'm wondering, but if I look at the activism now, and I look at the people who were our ages, correct me if I'm wrong, it does not feel like it's university located anymore, that the activism is now
No, I mean, this is 50 years
taking
later. Yeah.
place in a different arena. Do you think that's true? And I mean, I know things evolve, but do you think that ours used to be student based and now theirs is more community based?
Yeah. I would say, because I was observant, and I met with a lot of the young activists in the Black Lives Matter movement in Seattle after George Floyd was killed. And it's about 40 of them that I met with, and they were all younger than 28. They were, yeah, that got involved in Black Lives Matter, but very few of them had already been involved in what we call Black student unions, no more than 5 or 6 of them. So it probably got a lot of expensive. However, I do know, because my granddaughter, Nia, was in the University of Washington all last year. She and her friends, they came to a lot of demonstrations. They were Blacks. The, the Black Student Union, for some reason, in the last 8 to 10 years, most of the leadership are women. And I think that's very good. They said there are brothers in it. They're just not that active. So to more specifically answer your question, I think that a lot of young Blacks are involved. I do not think that there's as much progressive and revolutionary activism on college campuses today as there were back in the 60s. But I'm not going to tell you, because I looked at the demonstrations in all 50 states after George Floyd was killed, and it was overwhelmingly youth, ages 16 to 30. And there were college and high school students involved, but they didn't, because of the dynamics of how the movement got started and why it got started, they weren't the primary involvers of it. And Black Lives Matter grew out of another police killing and outside of St. Louis. What's the name of that town?
Ferguson.
Ferguson. That the Black Lives Matter movement grew out of that, and it's broader. I just think that I think that the objective condition of Black people today, particularly this horrific focus on voter suppression that's going on in 43 states in this country, that we're gonna have to figure out a way to creatively get more students on college and high school campuses involved, because they have a little more time. But it has to be tied, like I told you, we did in the 60s. It's got to be tied to other sectors of the population if it's to be effective. And I see Teresa on my.
Cool.
Hi.
Hey.
Did you want to ask her?
Hmm?
Did you want to say something?
I want to say something. What you said something toward the end that I wrote down, because I think it really sums up your life. I'm so glad you're writing your book. Thank you. If you need any help, let me know. Hit me up.
Okay.
Coaching, whatever.
Okay.
Great coach.
You talked. Thank you.
Somebody said you're a great coach.
Yeah.
I am a great coach. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. She's been working with me,
okay.
and she's really good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Go on, Teresa.
Thank you all. You all taught me. So laying the foundation and being the change makers, laying the foundation, being the change makers. I think that that's something that's, again, you know, ties you and Joy and Elmer and Aaron, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, EJ, all those folks together. And I think that it's so important because even a lot of, you know, Seattleites and people in surrounding areas don't know this history, don't know how rich and powerful this history really, really was. And I think that the power is in, you know, Larry, I have this fantasy of myself and the countless other people whose lives you changed with your work and your activism all could get together and just shout you out at the same time. Like there have to be, I know Mia said this once when I mentioned it to her when you all were visiting here several years ago, and I was like, hi, Larry changed my life. And she's like, oh girl, please, you got to take a number. I mean, she said it in a fun way, but I knew she was right. I said, you know, I never thought about that because he just did so much for me, but hello, duh, right? Like, I know, you know, and I know, and I hope that people are coming up to you and their descendants and their ancestors are, you know, reminding you that you know, changing lives is an amazing life mission or purpose. And you, I don't know, Larry, it's hard to even articulate. And you are so humble and so down to earth. And then I loved hearing your voice. It just took me back because you are so clear. You're not just a great storyteller, but you frame everything. You have an incredible grasp of detail and everything. But
some
these
white people
stories,
say I sound too black.
well, gee,
I
you
sound
think?
like a Negro.
You really? How shocking.
Yeah.
But but for the folks who are
So
listening,
what's
you know,
new? Right. So what's new?
right? I mean, but and that's so you say thank you. It's true.
Right, right,
Yes, thank
right,
you so much.
exactly. Right. I do my
Hello.
best.
Oh, I should tell
Yes.
this. Thank you. Oh,
With that, I'm going to have to
Yeah.
just say thank you because it's 8 o'clock and we'll allow
Yes.
you to kind of linger for a moment. But Larry, thank you so much. And what you raised is that you were a child of a very special time. There were so many things happening.
nothing
When you
like the
talk about,
60s. Yeah.
yes, when you talk about the death of Malcolm X, all the way to the
And
death of Martin
Martin.
Luther
Yeah.
King, you played such a significant role in that. And I know that that gave birth to a movement that has continued. It has
Yeah.
sustained because we are
Yeah.
continuing to look at ethnic studies programs in colleges, and we owe that to you.
Oh,
I am so grateful that you took time to talk to us tonight because we have captured this information on tape. And
all
so we
right.
are very excited to continue to revisit it. And we want to thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for being with us here at Evergreen State College, Tacoma campus.
The pleasure's all mine, and I hope
Yes,
to work with and see all of you again.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
Bravo.